Welcome to Mindful Management, Creating a Trauma-Informed Work Environment, a podcast by Chefalo Consulting, where we share the knowledge, stories, and resources you need to create a trauma-informed culture that supports wellness, growth, and resilience. I'm your host, Shenandoah Chefalo. Welcome, everybody, to our next episode of Mindful Management. Today, we're super excited to introduce everybody to Becca Choi. Becca is a dynamic leader in her own right. She's at the forefront of trauma-informed systems change and community development here at Chefalo Consulting. I'm super excited to be able to do this formal interview with her. So I just want to give people a little bit about you and your background. We know that you have a background that's rich in content writing, graphic design, a passion for really turning vision into reality. She deals with me on a daily basis, so everyone will know that's a challenge of its own. She brings a unique blend of creativity and strategic thinking to her role as our operations and content director. Outside of the office, she's a yoga enthusiast, an aspiring chef, a dreamer of a pottery studio maybe one day, maybe talk about that, all of which fuel her holistic approach to personal and organizational wellness. Today, Becca is joining us to share her insights on how organizations can cultivate environments that prioritize safety, support, and empowerment, making a profound difference in both individual lives and collective culture. Welcome, Becca.
Hello, I'm happy to be here.
We're so happy to have you with us. So before we get into any specifics and dive into all the trauma-informed stuff I know both of us will want to tackle, I feel like today is really an opportunity for those listening to kind of hear some behind-the-scenes Chefalo Consulting things and some of the conversations we get lost in and rabbit holes. But before we do all of that, share a bit about your own journey. What makes you even interested in trauma-informed work in general?
To start at the beginning, my own journey is that I have a formal education in English and graphic design, which means that I am a writer at heart through and through and a creative designer alongside that. And while I think sometimes on paper it feels like that's separate from maybe the more systematic thinking of the work that we do and the large-scale community change work that we do, but I think that background ties so deeply together. My favorite parts of my literature degree were the sociological aspects of it. So looking into history, saying, here's a book that was written, a poem that was written, here's what was happening at the time, and here's how the two were influencing each other. And I think that is really core to the work that we do. And so then when I got very lucky and met you, Shen, and we started doing this work together, it all clicked for me. And it clicked for me in a way that looking at the past and how literature and society influence each other, that's happening right now with literature and media and how we interact with each other. So not just the written word and the things that we have on paper or in video, but how me and you as Shen and Becca talk to each other, how we engage in our communities. And yeah, I think that's where I find passion for the work. It really just, I don't know how to say it better than it just clicked for me. Like things just started to make sense.
I love that because I think we get asked this question quite a bit, which is like, how did you find this work? Because it's not a major in college. It's not a profession that's laid out in any course book or guidelines in college, for sure not in high school, but not in any advanced degrees as well. There's a few colleges where you can take a class in a trauma-informed principle, but there's not really anything that talks about trauma-informed systems, right? You can't get a degree in that. So what do you think in particular drew you to this field? Or what do you think you're really glad you had in your background to prepare you for this work?
I think what really drew me to this work, when I say this work, I'm referring specifically to the personal development piece of the work, the growing and changing piece of the work, the impacting the world around me piece of this work, is social justice and equity work I feel very passionate about. And I'd been doing this work, I think, long before I met you, Shen. And when I started doing the work here with Chefalo Consulting, being able to put language and tools and frameworks to the ideas that I had already been working through on my own for a long time just, skyrocketed my learning and growth. I would compare it to the difference of being self-taught to going through a program, right? Like I had been self-teaching myself for a while, in little ways, reflecting on the train or reading a book. And then when we started doing this work, the training that you do really is like laid out. Here are the things that you're working through. Here's the language we can put to it. And I think that was really helpful for me. But now that I have that language, it can be difficult to frame it for others when I say, well, that's the trauma-informed paradigm shift. And they say, I do not know what that means.
I appreciate that because I think we hear that a lot from our clients, which is, I know this thing you taught me, but I didn't have that framework, or I didn't have that language, or I didn't have that specificity around it, but I've been doing this thing. I just didn't know that's the thing I was doing, right? The world kind of caused me to find and use this tool that I didn't even know really was a tool. So, can you describe maybe how trauma informed principles, or you sort of hit upon the paradigm shift already, how have shifted from traditional paradigms of leadership and management within organizations? What you think that looks like for you?
Yes. And I think when it comes to leadership in organizations, I think the thing that people forget is that we're still talking about people and personal development at its core. So it's going to loop all back around. But when I think about the paradigm shift, just a refresher for anybody remembering that there are people listening to us, just a little strange. The paradigm shift is the shift from people are bad to people are suffering to people are strong. And when you lay it out like that, you look at it on paper and you say, yeah, that looks great. But in my daily life, that's actually a really challenging personal development journey. And I might frame that as an example from work. I am someone who loves to get things done. And I am someone who is very uncomfortable failing to meet a deadline. So I often create a sense of urgency in my own life, feeling like I need to just get things done, get through the list. And the way that the paradigm shift comes in is that I can get overwhelmed and feel like I'm a bad employee, and to reflect also, I'm a bad leader, I'm a bad partner, I'm a bad friend. And a lot of times this is happening subconsciously. Like I'm not even aware of it. I'm just feeling overwhelmed. I'm feeling shameful. I'm feeling guilty. And the paradigm shift is taking a moment to stop and breathe and say, you know what? I have a lot on my plate right now. I'm struggling with my workload, but that doesn't reflect on my character or who I am as a person or a leader. It just means that life is hard right now, and that's okay. And wow, look at the great job I did do. Let me celebrate some of my wins. Wow, I got through all these tasks, and it's helped me focus on the things that are going right. And while still acknowledging the things that maybe aren't going right, be able to say, like, that's okay, and we'll keep moving forward, and I can get through this.
So I love that, because this idea of the right and wrong and those being the only two gradients as well, right? But that either we're meeting expectations or we're failing expectations and not having any space for anything through this. So you frame the paradigm shift through your lens. So for other leaders or for people who maybe been through the training, we also talk about the what's wrong with you, what's happened to you, what's strong in you. So the paradigm shift can look or sound like a couple of different things there. How do you think that makes for healthier workplaces, or workplaces that support wellness in general versus maybe the traditional styles we've seen over the last couple of decades?
Yes, this is such a good question. And I think I want to use maybe some real world examples here. I have a friend who is about 3 months into a management role, and they are working in an environment where they have come in, it was a little uneasy at first, and now, hands down, every staff member loves them. And compared to even higher up managers, he has a relationship with them that the higher up managers do not have with the staff. And a staff member recently put in their 2 weeks, which is very difficult because this organization runs lean. They are often understaffed. And this friend said to me, I saw this coming. I knew exactly why. And it's because they have a relationship with this person. And they said, there's a big loss in this person leaving because they're a great employee and they do really add to the team. And the reason that they quit is because they don't feel safe with the higher up manager. They feel that that manager singles them out. And, when I question this a little bit, it seems that that is true. And it's true because that manager really wants that employee to succeed and they deeply care, but that's not how it comes off when you don't have the conversation. And my friend spoke to the manager. He said, listen, this is why this employee quit. It has to tie into your behavior. And the higher up manager was very defensive and said, no, that's not true. They said, I didn't even speak to them today. And I was like, that is the problem, though. Like, do you not see how that is the issue that's happening?
Let's just talk about that piece about safety, right? Because you're saying so many like really important things that I think I hear quite a bit as a facilitator and trainer and consultant. And safety is the first one that I just want to draw some attention to, because my next question is, what does safety look like for you? Right. And so I'm sort of saying that rhetorically. What does safety look like for Becca? But what does safety look like for this employee who put in their 2 weeks notice? What does safety look like for your friend? What does safety look like for the person in higher management as well? Because the answer is often very different in all four of those scenarios, but we don't have those conversations quite often, especially in a traditional paradigm of leadership. And so then when you say, oh, but don't you see that that's the problem? It's like, but maybe not for that person where they don't consider checking in as what makes them safe, oftentimes based on privilege, oftentimes based on power, right? Like they don't need that staff person to check in with them. So thus it's not reciprocal. But the person who's maybe lower on the food chain, so to speak, doesn't need that check in to feel safe and to feel valued and heard.
And then to bring this back to the paradigm shift too, I think that the shift that could happen here is on both ends, right? The leadership saying, oh, well, this is a bad employee. And their attitude was kind of like, well, they were a bad employee, so it's fine that we're losing them. Meanwhile, that is not, I think, the reality of the situation. And for, I think, the staff member, it's also, this is a bad manager and I need to quit is the solution, right? Because when we're stuck in that paradigm of what's wrong, it becomes, well, I have a bad manager. The only solution is I need to quit. Whereas if we move to what's happening and what's strong, the solutions just open up and there's so many other options.
This is a perfect tie into like what specific changes do you advocate for in leadership styles to accommodate kind of that theory? And you're sort of stepping around also this idea of reenactments as well, right? Which we may not have time to dive into with listeners at this point. But what specific changes do you think could happen to advocate for that? Because I think that's a big one that a lot of companies, whether they're private or government or school systems where we're hearing teachers are leaving in droves, but this is the one thing that we don't talk about is what's the change to incorporate this paradigm shift, do you think?
I think it's relationships. And to go back to safety, it's funny because I was just having this conversation with a friend yesterday. It's safety and it's safe relationships is really at the core of this work. I actually had a friend ask me a powerful question and she said, well, what's the difference between when doing something is really hard for you, but then at a different time doing that same thing is really easy for you? What's the difference? What's happening there? And it took me, I needed a little while to reflect, but the answer is safe relationships. It's really easy to come and talk to you, Shen, about a problem I might be having at work, as opposed to in the past, the idea of bringing a problem I'm having at work up to the person I'm having that problem with is like, no, because it'll just make the problem worse. But in a safe relationship, being transparent about what you're struggling with is going to help do the repair work.
And I think there's also a level of self-awareness. And something I think we try to take for granted, right? Even I'll just back up to what you said when you were like, how could you not see that you didn't connect the thing, right? Like what you're saying is the self-awareness piece there. And I'm pretty sure if we interviewed that leader, they'd be like, I'm really self-aware, right? So there is a disconnect that happens for us of what I think I'm doing versus what I'm actually doing that I think you have to talk about because it also matters the style in which you do it. But, as we say at Chefalo Consulting, right? Connections before correction. Like you're really not going to be able to talk about problems if you're not connected in the first place. And hard things are just going to happen. I mean, just for the two of us, I think we have a great relationship, and I can speak from that I statement, but it was building it before there's an issue, because there's going to be an issue. Becca and I talk about this every day, just in background migration things we're doing, where it's like, well, that doesn't work for me, but this works for me. And right, like that's just different people solve problem. What's going to work for both of us? How do we find a place where there's give and take? But you can't do that if you don't have a relationship.
Yes, and there's something you say in training, and it's something so powerful along these lines. It's not how do I get my way, it's how do we get our way. And that always sticks with me when thinking about teams.
So, considering your role at Chefalo Consulting, all that we do, can you think about walking us through maybe step by step and big steps, Becca, not little steps, processes that organization undergo when they're integrating trauma-informed practices into their culture? What are kind of the big milestone steps?
I love to talk about this because it's funny working with people who are like me, who get caught up in the little steps, because I say you just need to start with training. Clients will want a consulting plan, a strategic plan. And in the beginning, you said this to me and I didn't understand it, but now I understand it so deeply. I can't give you a plan before I know the people we're working with. I can't give you a clear consulting plan until I know who am I talking to for the consulting? What are they working through? Where are they at in their journey? Because that plan is going to look so different for not only every single team, but every single individual person has a different journey. So the first step is just training. Equip yourself with the knowledge, the language, the understanding. Let's all get on the same page, because if we're not working with the same facts, we're going to draw different conclusions. And if we're working with incomplete facts, we're going to draw different conclusions. So I say start with training. And then typically we have people go through the train the trainer program. But even without that, I would say the second step is individuals, and individuals make up organizations. So organizations, but also individuals in organizations doing the internal work every single day. And when I say that, I don't mean you're doing training every day, but in your 5 minutes of quiet reflection, are you thinking about how you can apply these tools to your everyday life? In your relationships, in and outside of work, are you experiencing growth and having the hard conversations? And if you're not at that place, what are you doing to build safe relationships so you can start having hard conversations? And so it's learning and then applying. And honestly, I would say that is kind of like, if we were to really break it down, those are the two cycles. You learn and you apply, and you learn and you apply, and you just keep doing that.
I love that. I think I would just add to the beginning the acknowledge, right? Which we have this conversation behind the scenes, which people might not want to hear, which is people think they know what they want, but they don't know what they want. We think the issue is leadership development. We think the issue is workplace well-being. We think the issue is insert any number of systemic issues, whether that's race or gender or sexuality, that pop up that people have been harmed. And really, it's much deeper than that. And all of those, we as people who read RFPs, I think, like, if we're honest with our listeners, many times we're saying, this isn't what you need. What you actually need based on this set of facts is not what you're asking for at all, right? And then we spend a lot of time convincing people that they're on the wrong track to start with.
And again, here's the thing about missing information. And I think this clicks for me probably about 6 months of us working together. It really clicked for me that these are not separate issues we're dealing with. And we always try to tackle them separately. There's initiatives to tackle homelessness. There's initiatives to improve literacy in children. There's so many different initiatives we want to talk about. We want to talk about housing. We want to talk about foster care. We want to talk about prison reform. We want to talk about poverty. We want to talk about women's rights. We want to talk about, and I think for a lot of people, and especially at my level where I work with some people who do mutual aid, and they're so hyper specific. And I think it's a yes, and these are great groups doing great things, and these are not separate issues. It's all the same issue, and it all kind of comes back to what we do when it comes to building relationships, building resilience, and healing and moving forward.
And I think it also ties into on the other side of the spectrum, because of course we deal in lots of nonprofits and governments who are dealing with lots of those root cause issues that you're talking about. But also, we talk about private industry, right? Where they're saying we want high performing teams or we want these sort of things. Like you can't get at its base a high performing team only happens or a lean team, which was another phrase you used earlier, right? Like that lean was being pushed quite a bit. Those are all amazing frameworks, but what are they sitting on? What is the foundation they sit on? And if they're not sitting on that trauma informed base of safety, of human centered first, I do think that that's such a critical piece. So, what do you think is the most common pitfall that organizations and leaders could think about avoiding or that creep up on them that always seems to surprise them, but maybe doesn't surprise us?
It's funny because when you say this about pitfalls, it's a pitfall that I make in my own life. And that pitfall is thinking that the solution is other people need to change. And whenever I get in this mindset of they just need to stop being so stubborn and they just need to step up, I get stuck. And that becomes the only solution is they just have to do something differently. And so I say this is the biggest pitfall for leaders, but also us as leaders of this work, acknowledging that we too make this mistake. And it's not about not making the mistake, but it's about, okay, how do I step back and acknowledge there are things that I can do to change this situation? And maybe it's less about other people changing and it's more about me changing my perspective.
So I love that. Back to the paradigm shift. I would just add, like, if I asked myself that question, I would just add the speed. Everyone thinks everything is this to me is more and more. I find myself almost preaching on this, I feel like, which I don't really love that phrasing, but I can't think of a better word at this time, which is the difference between urgent and important. That sometimes slowing down and moving intentionally versus, and you talked about this sort of in the beginning of introducing yourself about, I like to accomplish a task. And as Becca's supervisor, I'll just tell everybody, listen, give Becca a to-do list. It's great. But things arise. Like sometimes we need to sit with something. Like sometimes we just need to sit with it for a week or 2 weeks. And if you're so task driven that can become uncomfortable, that you need the speed so much, you really miss a lot of perspectives and idea to really respond from that prefrontal cortex versus our survival brain of just move for the sake of moving is another piece to me that needs to be balanced with that idea of me shifting versus everybody else shifting.
Yes, and I would love to add to this idea about the pace of change because this helped me so much in my own life is that there is always a time gap between kind of the milestones of change. The first milestone is there is a problem, and there's always a gap between there is a problem and I recognize the problem. And then there's a gap between I recognize the problem and I want to do something about the problem. And then there's a gap between I want to do something about the problem and here's what I'm gonna do about the problem. And then there's a gap between actually doing the thing. And then there's a gap between doing the thing and seeing the results. And so what were there like 5 or 6 milestones there? And if you can imagine there's 1 week, 2 weeks, 2 months between each of those steps, a seemingly minor change, talk about behavioral changes, right? It could take a year, 2 years, 3 years, a lifetime to actually make that shift.
Right. Because you also have to give yourself time to fail in there. I might do it. I might do it really well 5 times and I might screw it up really badly 10 times, right? So that ability to also mess up and have to do the repair work from messing up to then get my train back on the right tracks, going down the right line to the right destination again is a lot of work. So I just appreciate that, Becca, about the time gaps first of, is there a problem? If so, is my solution even the right solution, which is another piece? Or am I stuck in that paradigm shift that Becca just needs to stop her behavior? And that's really the shift versus me. You can only change yourself. Like there is no changing others, only you. So let's just talk about that kind of dual approach to healing, addressing both individual and organizational trauma. You said it earlier, organizations are made up of people. People have experiences, right? These two things feed each other. So can you think of a case study or an example where the approach led to tangible improvements in satisfaction or output when balancing both?
When we think about really concrete examples of proof that this work works, I always think back to the school districts we're working in. I'm not sure if we're allowed to name them on the podcast or not, or the degree to which we're allowed to share some of the specifics, but we're seeing reduced suicide attempts. We're seeing improved attendance from both staff and students, reduced turnover. There is a school not far away that offers a higher pay, and yet that school is losing employees while the school we're working with is gaining employees. Because for the staff, it's about the workplace culture and it's about being able to come to work and feel safe with your team.
It's such a strong reminder. Like, those are big things that you're talking about. It feels a little like we're shooting our own horn, but sometimes, as I was just saying, we have to. Otherwise, we can fall into the swamp of infinite sadness, right? Like, we have to balance that. But I think what you're saying is so important about this dual approach that it's, yes, it's a school district. So, of course, we think about student outcomes, reduce suicide rates, and increase in attendance, right? All of these things, student emotional well being, right? SEL, the social emotional learning piece for students, better test scores. But that only happens if staff feels connected individually and committed and feels well and are able to show up as their best versions of themselves. And I think that's just so true in all organizations that whoever you serve, whoever is your client, your customer, your patient, to improve those outcomes is that internal piece has to improve as well. Anything unexpected in benefits that you've seen? Because we also know that measuring this work can be really difficult. Like, how do you measure satisfaction? How do you measure people's wellness actually shifting? That's a really hard thing to measure. But anything that's been an unexpected benefit that you've seen.
The most unexpected stories from this work are often the ones where there is a person who we often see as the problem, right? They have views where you are like, that is not rooted in facts. I can't reach you with logic. And they often have very harmful and loud opinions. And to see the shift in a person who kind of fits that description is always amazing to me because I think working with people who are generally self-aware, who are generally, they're already bought into caring about wellness and social equity. To see someone like that shift, it's like, oh, this is great. You're getting it. You're seeing the path forward. But to see someone who you're thinking they will never buy into this work, it is simply not anything they would ever be interested in. And we're wrong. That's a false assumption that we're making. And to see that shift, I think is unexpected and really impactful.
I'm always surprised at the feedback of emails from sometimes the most unexpected of places. I mean, for me, it's always inspiring when people share and are vulnerable to share the shifts that they're having from personal or organizational perspectives. I always love that. But to your point, when it is somebody who is just like, this is dumb, and then is like, wait, what? And that light bulb moment goes off is really super inspiring. So what do you think then, in your opinion, are the most under-recognized, but perhaps critical aspects of implementing trauma-informed practices in a corporate setting? So who are we not reaching, Becca, that we should be? Because we talk about language quite often. Like, do they need to hear leadership development? Do they need to hear diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging? Do they need to hear workplace well-being? But what do you think is the most under-recognized, but a critical aspect of implementing this work?
My mind first jumps to thinking about private industry because this work grew out of health and healthcare. That's where this work was for a long time. And now where we're at 30 years later is starting to bring this work to a lot of public service agencies. And I think the next step is going to be private industry, especially because when I hear my friends talk about the things they're going through, I'm like, you need these tools, like use these at work. And they work because no matter what organization you're in, we are people dealing with human issues. And so I think when it comes to a specific aspect, it can be hard because trauma-informed approaches are so many things. It's employee wellness, it's trust and transparency, it's accountability. I think accountability might be a big overlooked one because
Accountability at all levels, right?
Yeah, and I think it's because we don't wanna do it because it doesn't feel good.
I want to hold you accountable, but please don't hold me accountable.
Yeah, because I think a lot of the things we talk about, like we're building resilience, we're building strong teams, employee wellness, moving forward, positive change, they're all really feel good things. But accountability is going to make you feel bad. Well, let me rewind because there are no bad feelings. Accountability is going to feel really uncomfortable, and it's supposed to, and it's necessary. I think that's the one thing I rarely see in RFPs, unless that organization has gone through something really traumatic for the organization as a whole and really harmful.
And I think what you're saying is we're trying to do something other than a pizza party. Like this works that we're talking about. I mean, for me, that's the under-recognized thing that I want to talk about is like, this isn't just about having the summer gathering where we all just gather and share food and have a potluck, right? This is about no, how do we feel safe day to day? And I say this to organizations all the time and to employees in those organizations. What do you need to make you excited to come back to work on Monday morning? Like, what would that look like? Because that's the culture I'm trying to create is for you, for your organization. What do you all need? So not that you don't want to have time off, it's a balance, but how you enjoy going to work. And it's not like, oh my God, Mondays, I got to push through the next 5 days to pay my bills, but like you actually enjoy going.
I have a fun story for you, Shen. Have you ever seen those videos where nurses will give children a vaccine and they say, "Oh, do you have a best friend?" And the child doesn't notice? I had this done to me for the first time, and I was so amazed because vaccines are always so painful for me. But my recent COVID vaccine, I felt not a thing. And she asked me, "Do you have any hobbies?" And I said, "Well, I have a lot of hobbies, but recently I've spent most of my time working." And I started talking about you and the work we do. And it was so refreshing to be like, wow, I really do love the work that I do.
I love it because I have a phobia of needles as it is. So I'm always like, I have to warn every nurse, pharmacist, whoever's giving me a shot, like I'm the world's biggest baby. So just don't mind me as I like look the other way and like scream out somebody's name. So as we look towards the future, Becca, how do you see the evolution of trauma informed practices within business? Thinking about, again, we're talking about mindful management here. So are you thinking about emerging trends, innovations? We've been spending a lot of time talking about AI, but what do you think will redefine how organizations manage and support trauma informed change over the next maybe 5 to 10 years?
I'm thinking there might be a difference between my hopes and reality. Thinking about when we talk about how change is slow, and this work developed, I think, 95, so 30 years. And so now I feel that it's really just starting to enter the mainstream. And I say starting to enter the mainstream because there are a lot of people I talk to where I need to have like a 20-minute conversation with them because they ask me about my job. And then the option is, do they not understand and we just let them smile and nod? Or do we have a real conversation and then it's like, oh, hello, stranger, now we're friends. And I think that 5 to 10 years, it really isn't that long. In 5 to 10 years, where will we really be at? I think we'll just be a little bit further than we are now. I don't know that we'll see any massive shifts, but I think we're going to see more and more single agencies start to adopt this framework. And the more it becomes popular, I think we are going to eventually reach a point. And I think if I had to take a wild stab at it, probably at the end of that range, somewhere around 10 years, we'll start to see organizations really pick up and say, this is the standard now. And then all of a sudden, we'll see a rush in demand for this work. And we'll see people wanting to rush through it. And we'll see the same problems.
All right. So we can hope. There's always hope. That's the thing that pushes us to stay. But if you had one simple actionable tip that you could offer to organizations looking to boost their team spirits just right now, like to do one easy thing to move the needle even a little bit, what would that be?
Implement community meeting. It takes 3 minutes at the start of every meeting you have to connect. And it is that easy, and just do it consistently. Do it every day.
So you're going to have to tell listeners, Becca, what are the 3 questions for community meeting?
Community meeting is, how are you feeling? What is your goal for our time together? And who can you ask for support? And we do not need to explain our answers.
And I feel like we're going to have to make a quick one sheet for people to download on the website for community, perhaps after they hear this. Becca's adding to her to-do list as she's doing her podcast, which is what happens around these parts. So we're kind of used to that. So as we end the near of our chat today, could you share any special aha moments you've had when you first maybe saw a positive impact from trauma-informed changes that you were making either personally or professionally, or anything that you've maybe even been championing, in your friend groups or in other spaces that you're in as well?
I think my recent aha has just been the power of trauma-informed coaching, because I have been in therapy for a very long time and have taught my friends coaching. And I love when my friends can coach me. It was a selfish thing I really did, teaching them this tool. And therapy is great. I 100% support therapy, plan on continuing to go. And coaching is what really helps me dig deep the powerful questions, and just, I think the power of the right powerful question at the right time never ceases to amaze me.
I appreciate that. First off, because it's the thing I champion the most. So you're speaking to my own heart there. And it's the spaces in between therapy, right? Like I say this all the time is like, therapy wasn't my first go-to. I had a lot of bad therapy in my mind. And I think a lot of people listening will probably be nodding their head when I say this. It's also not accessible for everybody, right? There's a lot of privilege in being able to access therapy and access good therapy that's a fit for you. But even if you are accessing good therapy, you're there an hour a week, sometimes every other week. Sometimes people are only going once a month. What do you do in all the other spaces? And to me, that's where coaching really fits. And for those of us who aren't therapists, you're not a therapist, I'm not a therapist, it's the tool we get to use with everybody else in all the other spaces and ways, right? Even if they're perfect strangers. And so for me, I love that. I love that that's been your aha. All right. So, Becca, anything else you want our listeners to know before I give you some quick fire questions to wrap up for today?
I think I'm going to have to get used to that. It's so strange to me, our listeners, because I'm so used to just having private conversations with you about all these things all the time. I think I just want our listeners to know that we are real people. We are Becca and Shen. We're not some enigma that it just exists in the ether. And that if you want to reach out to us, you can. You go to our website, chefaloconsulting.com, and our emails are there, our phone numbers are there. Please don't text us too much, but send me an email and I'll reply.
So, Becca, let's do fun questions, which is maybe my favorite part of the interview. What's the latest book or show, or you can have both perhaps, that has caught your attention, and why did it stand out to you?
I am a chronic multi-reader, so I'm reading like 6 or 7 books right now that I'm in the middle of.
This is not a skill I have. I am a one only gal. They'll all blend together for me. So I'm enamored that you can do that. But what's the one that's caught your attention right now?
I think if I had to pick one, it would be Systems Thinking for Social Change. This is my favorite because it's such big picture thinking and it's got actionable solutions. And I think while it is missing some of the trauma-informed approaches that we do, I think it's a big piece of this work that we do. And it's a really eye-opening book.
I love that. I think that ties in for me, the aha of just working with you has been that one of the things you said to me early on was, Shen, I get trauma for people. That makes perfect sense. But this whole organizational thing, I'm just not sure it's resonating. When I was like, Becca, have you read Systems Thinking? And then you were maybe 2 chapters in and we're like, I get it now. So it's a good one. Systems Thinking for Social Change, Peter David Stroh. Our listeners will make sure we have a link so you can check that out. If you could have dinner with any historical figure or contemporary leader, who would it be and what would you want to ask them?
In college, I wrote a 30-page thesis on a 8 or something line poem. Give you a little insight on me. And I would probably want to sit down with the author of that poem, Stevie Smith. The poem in question is Not Waving But Drowning, and I wrote it on gender nonconformity. And there's a lot of debate around her work. She's often touted as like a feminist author. And I kind of came in and said, yes, but you're kind of missing the whole gender piece that she's playing with. And I would love to just talk to her and say, like, was I right? Was this really going on? Or am I totally off base here?
Or did I spend years of my life writing a 30-page dissertation that's completely off base? That feels fair. So I think we're going to have to put a link to that poem as well. What's one hobby or activity you've recently started or something you're hoping to start soon?
Here we could talk about pottery. Pottery is not a recent hobby, but it's a recent restarted hobby. I did it a little bit in college and then recently joined a studio. And there is just something really meditative about the process. And it will certainly teach you failure and disappointment. It's like exposure therapy.
How about a favorite quote that you've been thinking about or something that you want to end on or a last thought for our listeners?
I actually think I want to share a quote from you, Shen. I have a lot of Shen quotes living in my head. And it's, if you want to help people heal, you need to let go of control of how they heal. That really helped me.
Becca, it's been a pleasure having you. We're going to have you again. I think there's so many behind the scenes things at Chefalo Consulting that we've just sort of tipped the iceberg at that we can dive in much longer. So thanks for coming today. Thanks for helping us kick off Mindful Management Podcast. So glad to have you. And for any of our listeners, you can reach Becca at chefaloconsulting.com. She'll be glad to jump on a Zoom call with you. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today. Please remember, Chefalo Consulting, the trauma-informed agency that provides expert training, coaching, and consulting services to organizations and individuals. We use our lived experience to inform our training models, and we practice what we teach. We look forward to having you join us next time on Mindful Management. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Mindful Management, Creating a Trauma-Informed Work Environment, is brought to you by Chefalo Consulting. To learn more about Chefalo Consulting and our trauma-informed change management and professional development solutions, please visit chefaloconsulting.com. That's Chefalo, Chefalo, consulting.com. Make sure you don't miss these transformative conversations by subscribing to Mindful Management wherever you get your podcast. Thanks for listening, and remember, change happens one step at a time.